Will Link be stuck in this range forever, or might we expect a breakout soon? Let's go ahead and discuss. So hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. I want to talk about Link, give an update. Some things have happened since the last video. Here in the middle of June, we actually had what looked like a potential breakdown out of this range that maybe could have taken us to lower prices. But in fact, that didn't happen. We kind of spent just a few days down here and then quickly reversed to the upside, and now we're basically smack dab right back in the middle of that range. And so kind of from a broader picture, so far it doesn't look like too much has changed. We'd probably like to see Link go in, set in a higher high up here, kind of get higher in this range to be more confident that it's going to continue ranging in this level. But so far, it looks like not a whole lot has changed, even though we did go in and actually set in new lows relative to this kind of over a year-long range we had been in back here. Let's go talk about this a little bit more, what we might look at. So one things that I've been watching with Link all throughout this range has been our short-term upside downside potential indicator for Link, short-term UDPI for Link. So if you're not familiar with that model, the UDPI is basically our risk model. So higher levels mean higher risk, lower levels mean lower risk. And in the name short term, this is really reactive to moves that play out over days to weeks. So relatively short term in its time horizon. And one of the things I've talked about before is that all throughout this range that we have been in this kind of whole time, when you look at the short-term UDPI, this teal line here, you can see some relative consistency in when Link has tended to kind of find local tops in kind of this band between these two yellow lines here at the top, and then also when it's found local lows between these two yellow lines down here at the bottom. You can see a relative consistency here, where whenever you're tapping those levels on the short-term UDPI, tends to coincide with local bottoms, and you get some move back up towards the higher level of the range. And then likewise, when you get up into this higher zone here, every single time you tap it, that means that you're getting either at or getting close to a local top that then often reverses back down towards the lower end of the range. And what's interesting was that even though this breakdown we got here in the middle of June was technically a breakdown below the range in terms of price, it was not a breakdown, out of the range in terms of the short-term UDPI. In fact, we bounced to the upside right at pretty much the exact same level we did back here and close to the exact same level we did back here in December of 2022. And so getting a bounce to the upside and some reversal was very reasonable from that point. And indeed, that's what we have seen going back to the upside. And you'll note that currently on the short-term UDPI, it's about negative 1.88 right now. Kind of the top of this range here is somewhere around -1, or not the top, but the kind of the first line I have here, this first yellow line. And so if the short-term UDPI continues to move up and then gets back into this range again, whatever price that happens to be at for Link might be where I'd expect, another local top to form. Maybe some kind of downward movement might happen, bringing us back down a bit before moving back up, so on and so forth. It seems like this range has been pretty consistent. Until we see something that can really just definitively break us out one way or the other, I'm not seeing any reason to be thinking that that's really necessarily going to change in the short term. So if you want to be following the short-term UDPI for yourself for Link, you can go over to our website, polaritydigital.io, link in the description. And those who sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro subscription service, currently only $15 a month, can not only view all these data for free, but the data from all our other models across all the other assets that we support beyond just Link. So if you're interested, highly recommend you go and check that out. That's one of the things I'm going to be watching for Link in kind of the more short term, is that if we stay in this range, then kind of playing off of these levels would make a lot of sense in terms of when we expect local highs and local lows to form. But zooming out a little bit more then, I wanted to talk about Link and how it is stacking up relative to assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So talk about the Link, in this case, the Link Bitcoin valuation, then talk about the Link Ethereum valuation next. So essentially what this is doing is it's just the number that you're seeing over here, which is so small it doesn't really show up here. But basically what this is looking at is the number of Bitcoin you can buy with one Link. And obviously it's just a small fraction because the Link is trading at substantially lower value per Link than Bitcoin. But more importantly, what this kind of chart will tell you is relative performance. If this is in an uptrend, if you see this moving up, that's corresponding to an outperformance of Link relative to Bitcoin. That Link is doing better than Bitcoin, either to the upside or to the downside. So it's either rising faster than Bitcoin to the upside or falling slower than Bitcoin to the downside. what you can see with Link is that there's been kind of two phases so far in its life. There's been kind of this initial phase where really coming out of, arguably kind of around here in July of 2018, it just was more or less just going on a tear against Bitcoin. You can see it just really rallying. And so from the early part of this was because it was falling less than Bitcoin was falling. Link, if we just go and look at its price chart through here, Link was relatively sideways here, whereas Bitcoin was really crashing. Bitcoin is still very much in a bear market throughout this period. And so that's why you're seeing this happen so far here. That means Link was performing to the downside relative to Bitcoin. But then after that, as you get up into August 2020, it was because Link was moving to the upside faster than Bitcoin was. This whole time, Link was outperforming in both directions. It was outperforming to the downside and outperforming to the upside. Then really after that, kind of going into that kind of the middle of DeFi mania here, then as we move on, going into the bull market going into 2021, actually Bitcoin then ended up being an outperformer relative to Link. Bitcoin outperformed Link, and that has pretty much just continued. Now, Link did put in some upside against Bitcoin throughout this phase, from mid-2022 through to December of 2022. And again, that was because Link was going sideways. So very similar to what we saw here. Link was going sideways. Bitcoin was still falling at that point. But then kind of importantly, where things have deviated from this kind of analog that we're looking at back here, was that Link has not been joining Bitcoin in this rally that Bitcoin's been going on. So Bitcoin has now been outperforming Link to the upside, whereas, of course, we know that Link has just pretty much more or less just been stuck in this range, even though we did go and set in some new lows down here, but now we're bouncing back into that same general level. And so the question that you can look at that is say, okay, why? Why is it that Link is not going to just do the same thing it did back here relative to Bitcoin when, versus here? You might have thought that this kind of action was looking not too dissimilar from this kind of action that we saw here, Bitcoin falling, but Link being relatively sideways. And I think one of the reasons is kind of the regulatory lack of clarity around DeFi. I think Link got really wrapped up in the speculative excitement and hype around DeFi back in 2020 when that was really starting to heat up, and really benefited from that. Really went on a massive runs to the upside and outperformed a lot of the crypto market during those times. But now we're in a situation where regulation around DeFi is very unclear. It's not really being tackled by a lot of governments directly. I mean, obviously the U.S. isn't even touching it yet, and no one really expects Gary Gensler or the SEC to do anything particularly productive on that. But even jurisdictions like the EU have kind of pushed that down. They passed some crypto regulation, but DeFi was not really a main focus of that. And so I think until DeFi were to get some kind of clarity or something that could allow another big hype bubble to go into it, that catalyst is sort of off the table. Not to say it can't come back. Anything can happen in crypto. But I think the things that might give rise to that are still a ways away. So that spark might be, kind of relatively off the table. And so that's where I think that the spark that, maybe could send Link on another run against Bitcoin would be if something else happens that's able to do that. Like for example, cross-chain interoperability protocol, CCIP, being a kind of a very new undertaking, in terms of direction and focus for Link, where I think a lot of people have been thinking of Link as just being a DeFi token, but really with the CCIP, it makes it a whole lot more than that. Obviously it's already more than that. It's not just DeFi as it is, but this would make it kind of even beyond that, and kind of taking its function beyond just being an oracle to something that's really enabling interoperability to a much larger scale. And so if that really gets launched, it is successful, and if it starts getting a lot of usage, I could see that being a bullish narrative for Link that might be able to help kind of snap it out of the funk that it's been in over a year now, and maybe could be a catalyst for a nice run against Bitcoin that's more prolonged. And I think what most Link holders would hope for is that would be a run to the upside that's outperforming Bitcoin. And so I think what we probably need to see is the broader markets remain bullish, Bitcoin generally remain bullish, then Link get a big catalyst that really can send it up faster than Bitcoin, like what we saw kind of through this phase over here. And so also if we look at Ethereum, I think it's a similar story. Now with Ethereum, Link has kind of fallen off maybe a bit more rapidly than against Bitcoin, but it's still, I think, a very similar story. We had a lot of outperformance really up through August 2020, and now even underperforming here as well. And so I think the narrative is basically the same. And so in my expectation against both Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think unless Link gets some kind of bullish catalyst that can really start letting it put in decent moves to the upside, I think it just at best kind of remaining stable against Bitcoin and Ethereum is about as much as we can probably expect right now. That's the current trend. But that could change on a relative dime. We'll have to wait and see. And then certainly if that happens, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Link were to be able to put in some decent rallies against Bitcoin and Ethereum. Don't think we can replicate this kind of extreme price action from the first time around, but I still think a decent run against both of them is plausible if that kind of thing starts to materialize. And so then if we zoom out kind of to even the more broad perspective, I think one of the questions we can ask then is, regardless of what happens in the shorter medium term against Bitcoin and Ethereum or just against the US dollar itself, what are the long-term perspectives for Link? Is this something that we think is going to survive to the next the next bull market? In my own personal opinion, obviously nothing that I'm saying here is financial advice, you just make your own opinion. But in my personal opinion, I think Link stands a far better chance of making it to the next bull market than a heck of a lot of other altcoins that are out there. And one of the reasons that I say that is that Link is one of the few altcoins that has a lot of use right now, that it's just being used by a ton of different protocols. Not only are there a bunch of people who hold Link and kind of people who follow the project because they're interested and kind of believe in its long-term prospects, but that's kind of backed up by the fact that it's being used by so many different protocols across so many different chains. It really is one of the most used altcoins that's out there. I don't even think that's arguable. I think it just is true. It's one of the most used altcoins out there. And so really, if crypto is going to have another bull market, it seems like then Link should have another bull market too, because it just seems like crypto and Link are so interwoven at this point that unless something crazy were to happen where, let's say something blew up or something horrible happened where Link would for some reason lose a bunch of its market share, or imagine, there was some kind of security problem that happened, short of any really kind of extreme tail risk like that, I don't see much changing between now and, the next few years where, in theory, another bull market might start to form. And with that, it would be weird to argue that, Link would make it to the next bull market, but not also rise in price. I mean, in bull markets, that just tends to be what happens in crypto. All boats rise, just some to a greater degree than others. So that's where, for me personally, from a fundamental perspective, I feel relatively comfortable believing that Link will make it to the next bull market. I'm not going to make any strong claims about how well it's going to perform in that next bull market. But as long as crypto sees another bull market, I personally believe Link will be there to see it too, unless some extreme tail risk were to happen. And so then from that perspective, when you're thinking about it, it's, the question then is, do you think that Link is going to fall off a cliff way further than this? Or do you think that, this is somewhere around here is going to be the ultimate bottom if it's not already in yet? And then, eventually we just have to wait and be patient for the next bull market. And if that's the case, then, it wouldn't surprise me if this kind of sideways phase here ends up looking a lot like this sideways phase back here in the broader scheme of things. Imagine we go forward 2-3 years in the future. It would not surprise me at all if we were looking back and saying, oh man, look at this very classic key, great accumulation time that we're in back here before going off to the races. And the one thing I do also want to say with this accumulation zone is, we've been very depressed about it here, and a lot of people saying, oh, Link must be dead. Look how long it's just been ranging around here. Well, except for having a little bit more volatility back here, it also ranged sideways for quite a long time. If we just look at this, from the very beginning all the way to around here at the end of that range, that was 572 days. So, not quite, about a year and a half or so of just ranging sideways. And if we look over here, you can see that we're currently only at about 418. And so even just from that historical parallel, we're not even as long of a sideways range right now as we were back this first time around. And so that's where, in some ways, the more bored that other people get, the more that other people give up on Link, the more bullish I feel in some ways, because that's just what happens in accumulation zones. It's kind of all the people who want to sell, who want to get out, who don't care to hold it anymore, they do. And then suddenly there's not really much sell pressure left. And then whenever that next impulse comes, for whatever reason, that's going to be what really catapults price to the upside. So obviously none of this is financial advice, but to wrap us up, with Link, I think in the long term, I still don't think anything has changed fundamentally. I still think that Link is going to make it to the next bull market. And so then from that perspective, you can look at the short term and, even though it's always risky to play any kind of short-term movements, I do think it's notable how consistent the short-term UDPI for Link has been in identifying these local tops and bottoms within this range we've been in. We know that Link is not looking super great against Bitcoin and Ethereum currently, but that may or may not always be the case. And in fact, I probably think that at some point in the future, Link is going to start really outperforming. And so if it does, ultimately end up making it to the next bull market, which I believe it will, then really in some ways, it's just a matter of patience. And that's kind of the way that I'm seeing Link right now, is that kind of the more boring it is right now, actually the more bullish I feel. Because, people might just give up, give out, and then that might ultimately be what enables these bigger moves to the upside when all that sell pressure is gone. Time, of course, will tell, but that's what I'm looking at right now. All right, if you like the content, or subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. Also, check out polaritydigital.io. And if you're interested in getting access to live data from all our models, go ahead and sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro subscription service, only $15 a month right now.